This week on Great Chat, we are talking about the state of the tech media landscape with a very special guest, Casey Newton of Hardfork and Platformer. I'm Ashley, and this week we are joined by Helen and Sally. This podcast is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 companies to simplify their finances. We are huge Mercury fans of Great Chat, and we use it to run this podcast. A few of us are also current customers for our funds and startups, not to mention the dozens of founders we've backed as VCs, angels, and scouts that run their businesses on Mercury. If you're launching a startup or fund, visit mercury.com to apply online in 10 minutes or less. The onboarding couldn't be more intuitive or delightful. Quick note, Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. For details, check our show notes. Hey guys!
Hi!
Hello.
Hello. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this episode because we have our first guest of the season. And when we wanted to talk about state of the tech media landscape, there was like one person we all knew would be amazing, and that is Casey Newton, the co-host of Hardfork and the founder of Platformer, a tech media company. And so he will be joining us. But first, let's get into some headlines, and then we'll get all meta and talk about the industry that covers the headlines.
I love it.
I want to talk about the Anthropic settlement because I feel like that's something that we had some
we had a little
disagreement
bit of
about in the group
a
chat.
little debate.
Yeah.
Want to tee us
So,
up, Helen?
yeah, the summary is that, the headlines were that the judges, they ordered or Anthropic agreed to pay, I think, 1.5 billion to settle this
Just
this
at 1.5
lawsuit.
billion.
Yeah, and
Tiny
it was
amount.
class action technically, right? It was all of these writers. So we talked about like the whether or not this is good, bad, like what is the perception of this and what are the implications, I think, broadly for like other industries? Because I think one thing I started to think about is like, okay, these are books. Like, what about music? And what about movies? What about all, so I think that that's also very interesting as well.
I mean, like this is what we focused on in my last company is training fair use is the big question. And that's the thing that like Sam Altman and Elon Musk have both been pushing very hard in DC. And it was a significant case because the headline might say that Anthropic is paying $1.5 billion or they're setting aside for the authors. But the actual, the big news is the fact that Judge a few weeks ago had said that training is fair use. That the books that were legally acquired or legally purchased online and you trained with those books is okay. Because, however, the 1.5 billion that is set aside is because they had illegally downloaded it, meaning they scraped it on the internet and said, rather than paying whatever it was, how much it was to pay, and then they trained it, and then I think they try to cover their tracks by purchasing it post. And so that's the significant sum of it. I think there's also some debate now on if 1.5 they're going to do side deals, and I think the judge is upset about that. But yeah, it's a huge implication on if you can start scraping things or purchase. Okay, let's say you start purchasing a Netflix clip online legally and downloading and training, is that going to be fair use because you've legally downloaded? Those are, I think, questions that are going to come up. And then the wider thing around, can you just start scraping, various friends' newsletters and blogs and train it on that?
Right, because it costs maybe to actually buy a book, maybe it costs $10 or something, but you're training on that. You they only get that once. The author only gets that once. And so Sally, I feel like your perspective was this was such a legal win for Anthropic and the other LLMs. And then the other piece that was interesting is the pure implications of this headline. Anthropic agrees to $1.5 billion settlement with book authors. And Helen, I feel like your take was it was a positive PR moment. I was very much on the other side of that.
I always thought it was positive. My analogy was it felt like they didn't fight it. They were like, okay, you're right. We'll pay this. And my analogy was oh, you got a speeding ticket. You didn't contest it. You were like, you're right. My bad. I'll pay the fine.
Which I think is also 10% of the latest raise, right?
Yeah, and the before the current they've been in this lawsuit, before this current raise, so it's their investors knew
it was priced in,
right.
For
yeah,
sure.
it was priced in, and so no surprises, and so yeah, my take was that they're consistent. This is consistent with like the Anthropic, we are the good guys sort of brand. But
Yeah.
Ashley, you had a different
Yeah.
take, or
I
your
just think
mom had a
that's
different
like
take.
too nuanced, right? If you see like
Yeah.
the headlines are Anthropic has to pay out $1.5 billion, like even if the nuance there is they're agreeing to do it versus fighting, it seems like an admission of guilt and a penalty
Right.
for
Like
doing
that's a
something
lot of
wrong.
money. You must have done something really
Yeah.
bad, right?
Yeah, and
I-
so
I-
I just like don't I just think that maybe within tech, right? And to be fair, a lot of Anthropic's early customers are tech, right? Because it's like Claude Code that's their biggest product, and so maybe within tech circles and their like audience today that matters most, people who are and we're more predisposed to be following something like this and maybe understand the nuance of it and like already have the like, oh, Anthropic's the good guy and they decided to do the right thing here after like maybe doing something a little wrong. But I think to the average person who is seeing this number and seeing this headline, it's like, oh, like the big bad AI company like really messed up and hurt like these little authors and now has to pay out. And I think, Helen, you brought up a great point, which is just like we are so in a bubble, and it is so interesting to contemplate how people outside of tech like even think about what's happening in AI. And these headlines are so big, these dollar amounts are so big. Like it's definitely filtering out even to people who aren't yet playing with ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude.
Yes, yes. Because 1.5 billion is a lot of money. And then like it was the same week as OpenAI saying, "Oh, we're probably going to be $80 billion over our projected costs or something." I might be getting that wrong, but it
Are
was sort of
their
like,
losses are going to be 80 billion higher than like what they had
yes,
originally
exactly.
projected.
And like
Yeah.
I think to somebody who is not in tech, without all of this context, they're like, what is this? Right? Like all of my public funding for just, our livelihoods are in jeopardy, and it feels like everything is just getting
And the
taken
cost
away.
of
yeah.
eggs is high.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a pure
Egg wars.
speculation, but I do think the Anthropic $1.5 billion deal is, the story's not done. And again, this is like pure speculation, but I would not be surprised if they're doing some behind the scenes deal with big publishers that give them a lot more than what they're going to get. So I think it's like $3,000 per book that the authors can claim. But I bet you they might be doing something that is going to trump the PR motive around it. They also, the day after that announcement, I don't know if you guys saw, but Anthropic announced that they are supporting SB 35, which is it's all about the like AI model safety, which is going against like every other AI company that's against this bill. So they're clearly stacking up their PR narrative, and I wouldn't be surprised if they like did a deal with Simon Schuster or like all the people that are within that ecosystem, because it's hard to the if you're in the business rooms when these deals are being done, the thing that is making them hard to do these deals is how do you actually price the quality of the book? Is Shakespeare more valuable than this like new author that just came out, right? But this judgment is saying that every book is worth X amount of dollars. If you're doing the same deal with the publishers, the New York Times might say their content is more valuable than Politico or, a blog, right? So if you're doing these direct deals, you actually can get better value for higher quality. So I don't know. I'm just speculating.
I like that,
interesting.
Sally. Okay, so we're going to put a pin in it and we'll come back. And for what it's worth, like, I'm really glad there's an Anthropic in the world and like an LLM that like wants to be the good guy. And so I hope that they can figure out a way to sort of chart a course forward. Yay! Hi, Casey.
Hi,
Hey,
Casey.
Ashley.
Hi, how are we today?
Oh my goodness, we are so happy to have you here. You're like our first, well, you're first guest of the season, but like our first celebrity guest.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but I am so happy to be here. I am a fan of the show. I listen to every episode, although, of course, I do spend every episode saying, what is it going to take to get some male perspective on Great Chat? So I'm glad that I can be the person to do that today.
Wow, yeah, you are our first male guest. Amazing.
It's a huge honor. It's a huge honor.
Yeah. Well, you have like the weight of all male perspective
That's
on your
right.
shoulders. So
That's
I
right.
hope you can deliver.
Yeah.
I've always thought that I speak for all
No
men.
pressure.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, let's jump in. And you truly are a celebrity generally, but also relative to the topic that we want to tackle today. So one of the things that we like to talk about a lot is the changing media landscape, and usually from the perspective of like, what does that mean for founders and startups who are like trying to build their brands, trying to tell their stories. But we thought it could be really fun to pull back and talk more broadly about how the media landscape has changed, what it's like today. Even in just like the past few weeks, there have been, big headlines that are really emblematic of the spectrum of like what is happening in this ecosystem. So on the one hand, Financial Times is shutting down the Next Web, which used to be like a very sort of high output tech publication. A lot of great writers came out of that. And at the other end, the Free Press was just acquired for $200 million, which is like pretty phenomenal.
And they've been around for how long? They've been around for 3 years, 2 years, Free Press?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like a pandemic Barry Weiss departure from New York Times. So yeah, it can't be more than like 3-4 years max.
And that deal 3 years ago would have been like unimaginable.
Has that actually been announced? I saw that it was like sort of on the precipice of closing, but I didn't see that it actually happened.
Oh, well, this is what happens when you bring a journalist into the group chat. Casey,
Yes,
we don't know.
fact
We're
check.
not fact checking.
Real-time fact check. That's good.
All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes. And then Casey, the platform you started out on, Platformer Substack, is now a unicorn. AI, meanwhile, is like gutting web traffic from search. So these are truly wild times. And Casey, one of the reasons we're so excited to have you is like your career in tech journalism feels like a microcosm for this shift and for this change. You and I first met when you first moved to San Francisco way back when to cover tech for the San Francisco Chronicle. You were at The Verge for a long stretch. You started your first newsletter there when newsletters were like just starting to take off. And then, of course, you launched Platformer, your media company, in fall of 2020, which now feels like a long time ago. We are huge fans of Platformer. We regularly cite you, as you've probably heard, in our conversations. And then you also have a wildly popular podcast with Kevin Roose of the New York Times called Hard Fork. So maybe that's like the perfect place to start, because it feels like newsletters and podcasts are maybe like the only media format that's like really working right now. And I don't know, I'm so curious, like why do you think that is?
I think, at the risk of using an overused word, there is something that feels very authentic about a great podcast or a great newsletter. I think that most of the mainstream media products out there, although they're great at a lot of things, can come across as not having that same sense of humanity. A lot of news stories are very brief. They don't try to make sense of events for you. Sometimes it just kind of feels like a set of facts. And I think given how overwhelmed we are all day long by information, we crave something that's going to come along and tell us, how should I think about this? How should I feel about this? I want to spend time with somebody who I like, who kind of guides me through it. And I think newsletters and podcasts are just amazing at that.
Casey, I feel like, I think you and I met when you were living with Kara Swisher, and I went over to her house. And when you were starting Platformer, how did you position that newsletter, and has that changed over the years to today?
Yeah, I mean, I positioned it as a newsletter at the intersection of tech and democracy. I think it has always been really interested in how do social networks and platforms change the world around them. The sort of initial seed for me writing a newsletter at all was the backlash against Facebook. As you guys know, that eventually grew into a backlash against the entire tech industry. But it has changed. Platformer is about to turn 5 in a couple of weeks. And in this moment, I think of it as being a newsletter that still covers tech and democracy and social networks, but it's really about frontiers in governance. We have all these new amazing technologies that are filtering down into seemingly every surface of our lives. How are we going to govern those? How are we going to regulate those? How are we going to make sure that those are safe for people and create the world that we want to exist? So yeah, it's definitely evolved.
Something you just said about personality was really interesting, because I feel like, we just met, but I've been following you for a long time, and I feel like you do a really great job of actually, before, there were these, Substack or podcast personalities, that you actually did a very good job of like connecting with your reader. How does that work today, inside the newsroom? Because I feel like you were a little different, and that's kind of how you stood out. And now I feel like there's immense pressure within newsrooms in these more traditional, sort of institutions, for everyone to brand themselves. And that's actually a recurring theme on this podcast on like, how do you brand your, corporation or entity and balance that with like, your own personal brand. So how do you think about that today in this context?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think about it less in terms of brand than I do expertise. I think that all of the value in this moment is in having discrete expertise, hopefully on a niche but important subject. So for me, that niche was kind of social networks and democracy. And just by covering that every single day, it was a signal to the world, hey, if you're interested in those subjects, there's a guy that writes a newsletter about that, right? And that was sort of what enabled me to get that initial growth. But when I talk to other journalists or people in all sorts of other professions, I'm always encouraging them to develop that expertise, because to me, that's like a necessary prerequisite for having a brand. People want to start with the brand. People want to start with 100,000 followers. But if you want the followers, like, you have to do the work first. And to me, the work is trying to develop that expertise.
I don't know, Casey. I think the fact that you're so funny helps too. People enjoy following you. No, but I love that. It does feel like a shortcut to like, look at me. And one of the things we were sharing in the group chat was the Wall Street Journal is hiring a talent coach to work with their journalists to help them like build their personalities and brands on yeah, which really just felt like a sign of the times. Like, you used to just be able to be like heads down, reporting out, and now you actually, I feel like it's very similar to what's happened even in venture, where like the personal, whether we call it the personal brand or something else, actually maybe supersedes like the firm brand unless you work at a Sequoia, and like people they trust individuals, they don't trust institutions anymore. And so even if you're at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, your like individual reporter brand probably means more to your readers than like that like masthead.
But remember, like a few years ago, you weren't allowed to, if you were a reporter at the New York Times or CNBC, you weren't allowed to tweet on behalf of the network. So that's also shifted over the years. So, the newsroom is grappling with this even today. So yeah, Casey.
Everyone's grappling with this. Yeah. I think across all industries.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I'm so glad that I don't work for a big newsroom full time, right? It's just like a set of problems that I don't want and I don't have. I think newsrooms have been really slow to catch up to this phenomenon, primarily because it's against their interests, right? Like, once your reporters start thinking of themselves as talent, they get a lot more expensive. And most newsrooms are really cheap, right? So, like, it's interesting to me that they're coming along now and saying, hey, we're going to get you a talent coach. My guess is that the truly talented ones may still feel like they can make more money by leaving the newsroom. So we'll have to see.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's like literally the same thing that's happening in venture, not to keep bringing it back to that ecosystem. But like, the bigger your brand gets at a platform, the more obvious it is that you should go and leave and start your own thing. And so
it's also very similar in AI companies. A lot of researchers are becoming talent on their own, and they're tweeting about their research papers, and then all of a sudden that gets attention of the VCs. And
Mark swoops in with a 9-figure comp package. Again, we won't fact check that. I know that's been disputed. Well, maybe like a fun example of like talent and media is TBPN. And the Technology Brothers podcast network. And Casey, I'm curious, because I know you don't like actively participate in Twitter anymore, and it feels like it's such a like Twitter specific phenomenon. So I'm curious, like, are they on your radar? Like, they seem to have really leaned into like tech news as entertainment, like personality, maybe even over expertise. What are your thoughts?
I think they're super interesting. They have a theatrical quality to them that I really appreciate. It's very tongue-in-cheek. My very favorite thing that they've done so far is creating the little like player cards and trade announcements when the AI researchers started to move between companies. It was so perfect because it acknowledged that for a lot of us, following tech news is a kind of sport, and they're covering it like a sport. And I think that really resonates with a lot of folks in their audience. So yeah, I think that's like really smart. It's not journalism in the way that I practice it, but I'm not surprised that it's been successful because I think that their instincts are really good.
It reminds me a little bit of how on the sort of startup side, for a while, like every founder like cared about their launch on Product Hunt. And now when I'm talking to founders about like what's in their mix for like day of launch stuff, everyone wants to be on TBPN, and it kind of happened overnight, which is which is fascinating. It's like a go-to platform. But Sally, I feel like you're familiar with like in some ways this is replicating what like CNBC or Bloomberg have done for years. And so how does this like feel for you?
Yeah, I feel like, well, the audience of TBPN, the value of that is that they're really concentrated and they're very deep and narrow. And so if you're, let's say, an advertiser, which is the business that they're in, the business that CNBC is in, is if you're Brex or these companies that are selling into like entrepreneurs, it's a really valuable place to advertise versus CNBC, which is a much broader audience. So they've captured that like very narrow audience really well, versus I think people need to remember the audience of CNBC and Bloomberg are much more wider. They're everyone from your mom and pops that are looking at their 401k, hedge fund managers, bankers, people in ag. And I think that's the one confusion that people kind of always like to compare between CNBC and TBPN, that this is the next TBPN or this is the next CNBC, is that, yeah, it's been able to capture a small audience of that. I think a kind of a counter argument to where the like broader audience interest lies is if you look at both CNBC and Bloomberg, they've actually scaled back some of their like core tech coverage. So like our bureaus have downsized. That doesn't mean that like overall tech is not important. It's just that tech is now across every platform. And so rather than being it concentrated on like a very subset of the like venture community, it's in DC, it's in Washington, it's in every like business. So I think that's also an interesting trend that in the more traditional media sense.
I mean, I think it's easy for TBPN to feel so outsized, right? They are such a big part of the conversation when it comes to marketing and comms. And, we're spending all day with founders and startups, and it's it is the new product hunt, sort of like part of the de facto launch plan. And I think the thing that, I go back to, like I have a marketing background, is like, I don't know how to evaluate TBPN from like an advertising perspective because it's still CPMs. You're still, you're buying into the sort of like same rate cards that you would compare being on TBPN and the exposure to your audience versus like a CNBC and Bloomberg. And it's like, they're not even in the same ballpark, right? And so for someone who sits and lives and breathes tech all day, like it's just hard to, imagine that, but it's true. And like we've had conversations with advertisers and sort of like learn this, but it's, yeah, you're like in the bubble within the bubble. It's a hard thing to realize.
I also think, like, respectfully, it's just probably a lot easier for startups to get on TBPN than it is for them to get on Bloomberg and CNBC, right? It feels very accessible in the same way that, like, getting TechCrunch to write about your startup felt pretty accessible in the 2010s. So, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's one way that I think that they benefit is they'll kind of talk to anybody.
Well, and also they have such a positive orientation towards tech, right? And like maybe one of the biggest shifts is like, I don't know, when I was in my first startup job, Casey, maybe when you were at the Chronicle, and not that journalists didn't write critical stories, but overall like startups were underdogs and like taking shots at the big guys, and it was generally like a pretty like friendly relationship with some exceptions between the tech press and startups. And now like as tech has become so much bigger, as like tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of capital are like poured in every year, like it's a different relationship. And like TBPN feels, they probably hate this, but kind of like a safe space. If you're a founder, like they're not going to grill you. Like they're there to like cheer you on like a sports team.
It's also very clippable.
Well, I think the person who mastered this, clippable for sure, but like Harry Stebbings, 20VC as like a marketer, that was such a great format early on because he nailed the softball interview, right? Like there's no hard questions, and you throw your founder, you throw your CEO on there, and you know that like they're going to even edit it to put him in the best light possible. And I feel like TBPN is this new choppy format of like the 20-minute VC that Harry Stebbings started. And I don't know like I was a journalism major. I think some of you guys were too. It's like, this is an interesting direction. And I don't know what to do about like, I think the consistent cries you see on Twitter about like, why are tech writers so negative? Like yesterday, there was that Friend piece in Wired, the review. And there were all these cries of like, I don't think reporters should ever be able to write a negative article unless they've built a company themselves. I'm like, that's a high bar. Like, and so, I think
you could say the same about VCs, by the way. Maybe you
Well,
should
they do.
invest in
They do
companies.
say the same thing about VCs. I think, but I don't know what to do about this. Like knowing that journalism, graduates, they go out into the world, they want to write these long form investigative pieces, right? And like really uphold the integrity of what journalism is. But there is all this pressure, if you want to find a job and a cool one, right? You got to just be like positive vibes all the time. And so these things sort of, in friction with one another. I don't know where this goes, but we have also seen this before.
Yeah, I think there is a difference though between being critical and being negative. An example of that is I think like Andrew Ross Sorkin is a great interviewer who can be critical about a company, but no CEO I think walks away being all pissed off, but like all the audience feels like they've gotten a good question. I think Casey, you did the same with your Heartfork interview with Sam Altman and Brad Lightcap. Like you guys had a very like strong, punchy interview, but like I don't think like Sam and like Brad were like, oh, I'm like never talking to Casey again. Like this was like, what is this bullshit? And it was really like educational. And that's the difference, I think, between like the Harry Stebbings and maybe the TVPNs of the world. I also heard, and someone needs to fact check this, but I think Harry has said before that he sends the interview for review by the people that he interviewed.
That's
before he
right, which
puts it
is
out.
like rule number
yeah.
one of
Yeah.
journalism. You can't
As,
do that.
as someone who has like helped
Yeah, same.
facilitate those interviews
Same. That is
before, like
true.
you get all the questions,
Yep.
you get to input, you can flag edits.
Generally, I feel like if you're in media and you found a gimmick that works for you, like good for you. It's really hard if you pull it off. Congratulations. I'm a little bit surprised that there is an audience for what is essentially sponsored content, or maybe like free sponsored content in the case of the interviews that you're just talking about. But I don't know. It's a big world, and people want different things. And Platformer, I feel like, is pretty serious and critical. Heartfork, because it's a podcast, we want people to feel like they're having like a fun hang, and it does tend to be a little lighter. We do tell more jokes. We try to have more fun. And I've gotten several emails recently that are like, "You were too easy on the CEO of Waymo." And like people in our audience get really mad when they feel like we're not holding power to account. And to me, that's like somewhat confusing because I'm like, do you really want to listen to like a 30-minute interview where I'm just like beating up on someone? Like, why are we inviting them on our show if we hate them? So as in all things in life, I think the goal is to have some sort of balance, right? Where it's like you bring on some people that you have some really tough questions for, like hopefully we had for Sam and Brad. And then you have other people like the CEO of Waymo who we're hoping might save 40,000 lives a year in automobile accident deaths, right? So there's got to be a mix.
I also feel like, Casey, to your point, like the context for Platformer and the context for Heartfork are different. And like so much of that is like established with your audience and your audience understands. And it's actually when like a clip goes outside your audience or someone new comes in who isn't used to like what is the purpose and intent of this particular platform, that's when things I think can go like a little bit off because people come in with expectations but don't have the broader context. This is a good transition into, because I've been thinking about this a lot, Casey. I know I'm sure you are as well. Like, okay, so there's this whole like mantra around like going direct for founders, for VCs, like don't even work with the media anymore. Like I think back to the early days of Box, and our playbook was so like we did fully like outsource our story to the media, and it like worked beautifully, right? I mean, in the sense that like Aaron would talk to people and they would write, and it was generally like a great depiction of the company. And not only is that not doable anymore because of like the shift in maybe like the relationship between press and CEOs, but also like there's just like way too many startups. The types of stories we got about Box in the early days, like you can't run that playbook anymore. And so some of Go Direct I actually just think is like out of necessity because otherwise you're just never going to tell your story. But in a world where like VCs, founders, employees are like constantly like tweeting and like posting on LinkedIn and sharing everything that's happening about companies, stuff that used to be kind of a little bit more behind closed doors. How do you think the role of journalism has changed? Like what types of stories are like no longer valuable? Like what's more valuable?
Yeah, so I think, when I started out at The Verge, if there was a new startup that came along and I thought it was interesting, I'd write a story about it because there was sort of no cost to me. The Verge was a free website. It was supported by ads. I never expected those stories to get a ton of traffic necessarily, but I also wasn't being evaluated based on my traffic at the story level. So as long as I thought it was an interesting story, I could write it. Fast forward to today, I write 3 columns a week, and every time I write, I'm hoping that somebody who's never heard of me before is going to see it and pay me $10. In almost every case, it is not going to be a story about a new startup that gets somebody to pay me $10, right? It has to be something different. So, and this is probably a conversation for another day that I'm sort of desperate to have with you guys, but like, I think agency PR is in a crisis because what they're selling to me no longer has any real value. They cannot drive traffic to my website. They cannot get paid conversions for my website. All they have is a company that no one has ever heard of, and they're hoping that I'm going to spend a day on it. So I just think that that's like really changed and has been weirdly like under discussed in the startup world. To your other point, Ashley, like we've talked offline about the go direct stuff. You have a lot of really smart things to say, honestly, like smarter than I do. But I do get why founders are doing it, and I think it makes sense because at the end of the day, if you can create a clip of your thing and make it go viral on social media, that will make it more interesting to me. Like I have to admit, it just will. And so there's no reason not to take that swing as part of everything else that you're doing.
The Cluely playbook, like be so outlandish that people have to write about you as like a cultural phenomenon.
As
Yes.
Ashley pointed out, that's like the Trump and Kardashian playbook too, right? So
Yeah, we tend to talk about them a lot.
yeah, but I love what Casey just said about like that's going to get your attention and increase the likelihood that you are going to write about it. I think, a version of this that we've been seeing where, is making us a little bit nervous is like when the media just chases reporting of like the tweets, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like we've read some not so great articles where they're just like a day behind of just giving you the wrap up of like all the things that were tweeted. And for the extremely online, you're just like, what value is this article to me, right? And it feels very backwards, and it feels so validating for all of those voices that are like, see, traditional media is dead.
I was asked to a while ago, I forget what he even did, but there was some reporter who reached out to me. They wanted to write a profile of David Sachs, and they were like, "Do you have anything to say about like his recent action?" And I just thought about it. First of all, the answer was like, no. Like, why would I want to get into that? But like, if I did, I would 100% just put that on Twitter. It feels more honest,
Right.
just to like, if I'm gonna go at someone, I should just do it on my own platform, not through like a publication and an interview.
Yeah.
And so like that whole dynamic has shifted so much.
Yeah.
Casey, I'm curious, because you really did start the trend of like tech reporters leaving and starting their own, and now like fast forward 5 years, there's so many of our colleagues and my former colleagues that are doing the same, and now everyone's competing for the like $10 a month subscription. How do you kind of think about that like competitive landscape, and has that also shifted like how you build your business?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it is more competitive. I think that like churn is probably like up across an ecosystem of tech substacks, just because, hey, you were worth $100 to me last year, but I haven't liked your stuff lately, and this other guy has a new substack, so I'm going to subscribe to that. So I think all that's real. In aggregate, though, if you think about all the big names, for the most part, it seems like it's working out for them. Like most of these people don't share their financials online, but like you haven't seen too many of them flee back to the mainstream media. So I think it just speaks to the fact that this is like a weirdly small numbers game. Like if you find 2,000 people to pay you $100 a year, that's going to be more money than most reporters are going to make anywhere. Like literally, like it's inconceivable that they would ever make that money at any media publication for any reason.
Yeah.
So like as long as that dynamic holds, people are going to keep flaking off of that. That ecosystem. Now, the flip side of that is I think when you look at the stories in tech that have the biggest impact, most of them are still coming out of the big newsrooms. And so I do worry that we're in a bit of this dynamic where it's like, if you want to have impact, be in a newsroom. If you want to make money, go out by yourself. I don't think that's great for like journalism and society, but that does kind of seem to be the state of affairs.
That feels like a perfect place to end it, Casey. I know we have to let you go, but like, thank you so much for coming and chatting with us. And I want to come back and have that like our PR agency's totally fucked.
Yeah, that's a
discussion.
good one.
I have
so many
I have thoughts there.
I really wanna know.
They've been
I
fucked
like-
for like 6 years. They know this.
I
Yes.
want to like write the piece, but like I actually need to report it by like talking to a bunch of people at agencies first. But like there's something to be written.
Well, one quick hot take
Yeah.
is like the good agencies I know are just being so selective in who they take on. Like they're only taking on the clients that they already know media will want to talk to, but that just means it's such like a narrow group of people who have the support they need to tell their story, and everyone else is left out in the cold, or they're just working with agencies that are just like mass pitching people with no success. So let's go there. We'll invite you back in season 3.
I love it. Well, I would love to
Yay.
come back. I love your show. Thanks for having me.
Yay! Thank you,
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you.
Guys.
All right, guys, in the spirit of this week's topic for our Q&A, I thought it'd be fun to do a bit of a rapid fire on like where we get all of our tech news. And so maybe just to start, like what are your go-to sources for figuring out what on earth is happening in tech?
In the morning, I go to Twitter, then I read Abe Burns' newsletter, and then I go to TechCrunch, and then I go to Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal.
Wow. Is that like a morning stack every morning?
Yeah. But that's like a quick glance, and then I do a deeper dive. But, yeah.
I'm very impressed.
Yeah, I feel like I put way too much trust in the Twitter algorithm. So I think I start with Twitter. If I'll go anywhere else, it'll probably be Tech Meme, which, by the way, happy 20th
Shout out to
anniversary.
Gabe.
Happy 20th anniversary, Gabe.
Yeah, this Friday.
And
Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I feel like, sometimes Apple News, but honestly, like I get so much of my news from you guys and other group chats that I'm in that, it's like your own curated feed.
I feel like we're the same. I'm like very reactive to like what's in my Twitter feed, which used to be a better gauge than it is now, especially since you can't really share links. And then yeah, like Tech Meme for like the glance of like, let's make sure I didn't miss anything key. And then our group chat, like I feel like it's like in addition to being really fun, like the highest utility chat I have because I just won't miss anything crazy. We talked a lot about newsletters. Aside from Platformer, what are your guys' favorite subs? In tech news, or if you want to go beyond, go beyond.
I'm trying to think of the ones that I pay for. Like I pay for Newcomer. Eric's great. I think that he was like Casey's early, right, to the breaking off and doing his own thing. I felt like he dropped some bombs early on and just sort of hooked a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
Like he did that like sort of inside report on Andreessen Horowitz, maybe that was it. But I feel
Yeah.
like he's kept it up and he has a point of view, and I think he does a really great job of you know doing the deep dive hard questions. And so that's such a nice compliment to sort of like generic tech news of here's what's going on.
Yeah. I would include Eric Newcomer and Ben Thompson.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't even figure out how to cancel that thing. Yeah. It's
Talk
just,
about being like early to the newsletter trend though. Like he was like the lead newsletter everyone would write about when they wrote about like, newsletters as like viable businesses. So
oh, and then Matt Levine, Money Stuff. I think that he's just such a fun writer. Like he's such a good writer.
I also am really into Noah Smith, No Opinion, because like he'll cover tech stuff, but also has like a much broader like economic lens, and so he like helps pull me out of the bubble a bit, and tends to have like fun opinions. Actually, speaking of like the broader topic, state of journalism, he had an interesting one recently about like why he left Bloomberg to go all in on his newsletter. But we'll save that for another time. Maybe he can come on. Okay, and then last but not least, favorite tech podcast. Go. Aside from Hard Fork.
Great chat.
Gosh.
Woo!
Yeah, honestly, I don't know.
Oh, I
Is
love
that bad?
I love Acquired. I think just like the energy. I love when people love what they're making together. Like you can actually hear that between Casey and Kevin Roos, and like the Acquired guys, they're just like so excited about businesses, and you can tell they just like love doing this research, and they blow each other's minds with facts in the pot. It's actually just fun. It's almost like listening in on like the two nerdiest friends you could possibly imagine doing like a book report.
Okay, but Ashley, how do you structure your listening time? Like, do you break it off into chunks? Like, because like if you're somebody who's driving up and down California, every week, totally get it. But just for the average person, like, how do they make time for some of
Oh,
these podcasts?
totally. I agree. It is our road trip podcast
Yeah,
for
exactly.
sure.
So,
So
so you
like
like binge? Do you binge do it? Like, what's the
I
what's the okay, okay, got it,
100%
got it.
binge,
Yeah, yeah. All
100%.
right.
But I also like, like over the course of the day, I'm like walking my dog, doing the dishes, and so I can get through one of their podcasts in like 2 days, if I put my mind to it. All right. Thanks, guys. And we're gonna take a couple weeks break before next season. So we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you in a few weeks.